Download this code from codegive.com, link in the description below. Certainly. Chaos engineering is the practice of intentionally introducing failures into a system to test its resilience. AWS Fault Injection Simulator, FIS, is a service that allows you to carry out chaos engineering experiments on your applications running in AWS. This tutorial will guide you through the basics of chaos engineering with AWS FIS, particularly focusing on Amazon EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. Prerequisites: 1. AWS account. Make sure you have an AWS account. 2. EKS cluster. You should have an EKS cluster running. If you don't have one, you can create it using the AWS Management Console or AWS CLI. 3. Kubectl. Install Kubectl and configure it to interact with your EKS cluster. 4. IAM permissions. Ensure that you have the necessary IAM permissions to create experiments in AWS FIS. Step 1. Set up your EKS cluster. If you don't already have an EKS cluster, you can create one using the AWS Management Console or AWS CLI. For the purposes of this tutorial, we assume you already have a working EKS cluster with applications running on it. Step 2. Install AWS CLI and configure it. Make sure you have the AWS CLI installed and configured. Bash. AWS configure. Step 3. Create a sample application. For our chaos experiments, let's deploy a simple application. Here's an example of a basic Nginx deployment in your EKS cluster. YAML. API version, app/v1. Kind, deployment. Metadata. Name, Nginx. Labels. App, Nginx. Spec. Replicas, 2. Selector. Match labels. App, Nginx. Template. Metadata. Labels. App, Nginx. Spec. Containers. Name, Nginx. Image, Nginx latest. Ports. Container port, 80. Apply this deployment using Kubectl. Bash. Kubectl apply fnginx deployment.yaml. Step 4. Define a FIS experiment template. You'll need to create a FIS experiment template to specify the chaos engineering actions you want to perform. Below is an example of a YAML file that defines an experiment that terminates a pod in the EKS cluster. Create a file named chaosexperimenttemplate.yaml. YAML. Description: terminate a random Nginx pod. Targets: target Nginx. Resource type: AWS XPod. Resource ARNs: ARN AWS X region account _ID cluster /EKS _cluster _name. Selector: app equals Nginx. Count: 1. Actions: terminate pod. Action ID: AWS X terminate. Parameters: pod. Target: target Nginx. Duration: 60. Start after 0. Role ARN AWS IAM account _ID role /FIS role. Stop conditions: source: AWS CloudWatch alarm. Value: your alarm name. Replace region, account _ID and EKS _cluster _name with your actual values, and provide a suitable IAM role ARN that has permissions to execute the actions defined. Step 5. Create the experiment template. Now, create the experiment template using the AWS CLI. Bash. AWS FIS create experiment template CLI input JSON file // chaos-experiment-template.yaml. Step 6. Run the experiment. Once the experiment template is created, you can run the experiment using the following command. Bash AWS FIS start experiment template ID your experiment template ID. Replace your experiment template ID with the ID of the experiment template you created in the previous step. Step 7. Monitor the experiment. You can monitor the experiment's progress using the AWS Management Console or by checking the status through the AWS CLI. Bash AWS FIS list experiments. Step 8. Analyze results. Once the experiment is complete, analyze how your application responded to the chaos. Check the logs, metrics, and any alarms you might have set up to determine the impact of the terminated pod. Step 9. Clean up. After the experiment, don't forget to clean up any resources you created. Bash kubectl delete fninks deployment.yaml. AWS FIS delete experiment template ID your experiment template ID. Conclusion. You've successfully set up chaos engineering in an Amazon EKS environment using AWS Fault Injection Simulator. This approach helps ensure that your applications are resilient to failures and can handle unexpected issues in production. As you gain more experience, you can design more complex experiments and integrate them into your CI/CD pipeline for continuous testing of resilience. Further reading. AWS Fault Injection Simulator Documentation, https://docs.aws.amazon.com/fis/latest/user-guide/what-is-fis.html. Chaos Engineering Principles, https://principlesofchaos.org. Kubernetes Official Documentation, https://kubernetes.io/docs/home. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need further assistance.